Our speaker tonight is Rob Boston, a journalist and secular activist who joined Americans United for Separation of Church and State 35 years ago. From this vantage point, Rob has seen a lot, the evolution of America's leading secularist organizations, as well as the growth in number, size, and political power of religious right organizations. Rob has appeared regularly as a media spokesman for AU and Secular Americans, and now serves as the senior advisor to AU. Without further ado, it's my honor to introduce our speaker this evening, Rob Boston.
Thank you for joining. There comes a point in everyone's life where you start to sum up and reflect on the work you have done and what meaning, if any, it might have had. This is a natural thing to do as we age. And in my case, it is especially relevant as I'm starting to move toward retirement. Since 1987, it has been my full-time job at Americans United for Separation of Church and State to defend that principle. My work has taken different forms over the years. I've had different positions and jobs at Americans United. But if there's one thread that runs through it all, it is that I have been a communicator. Through writing, speaking, and media appearances, I have done my best to help Americans understand the constitutional principle of separation of church and state, what it means, and why they need to defend it. Now, I have always believed that to do this job well, it's helpful to know what the people who oppose separation of church and state are up to. And this means that I have occasionally spent time in the world of white Christian nationalism. For those not familiar with this term, white Christian nationalism is the belief that the United States was founded of, for, and by Christians of a certain type, and that everybody else is essentially a second-class citizen, to be tolerated perhaps, but not much else. White Christian nationalism. Think of those three words. It is white because its roots are in fundamentalist Protestant churches that are overwhelmingly white and historically have been overwhelmingly white. And it is often informed by political positions that arose during the Confederacy. The scholar Anthea Butler has observed in her book, White Evangelical Racism, quote, "Evangelicalism is an Americanized Christianity, born in the context of white Christian slaveholders. It sanctified and justified segregation, violence, and racial proscription. Slavery and racism permeate evangelicalism. As much as evangelicals like to protest that they are colorblind, their theologies, cultures, and beliefs are anything but. White Christian nationalism is Christian, but only in a very narrow sense. It embraces a very fundamentalist interpretation of Christianity, wedded to extremely conservative politics. This type of Christianity excludes millions of Americans who identify as Christian. In your community, I'm sure there are nice progressive Christians, the kind of people who worship in the liberal and moderate churches in your area. But to white Christian nationalists, those people aren't really Christians because they fail to interpret the Bible literally, and they don't often embrace far-right political positions. White Christian nationalism is nationalist in the sense that it maintains that the American government has a right, and indeed a duty, to embrace and further certain religious expressions, white, conservative, and Christian, due to the mistaken belief that our nation's origins, values, and traditions spring from these expressions, and that there is no separation of church and state. Under this form of nationalism, wedded to fundamentalist Christianity, because the government is officially Christian, again, as they define it, fundamentalist, far right, other views need not be tolerated or even allowed. And in fact, they can be perceived as a threat to the well-being of the state and its people. Public policy under this interpretation should be based on explicitly religious rationales that are white Christian and nationalist. Now, white Christian nationalism has been known by other names over the years. I remember when we called it the religious right, with the rise of the TV preachers in the 1980s. Sometimes we've called it simply theocracy. In a nutshell, these are people who reject the separation of church and state. They reject religious pluralism and diversity, and increasingly They reject democracy. They believe that because their religion is the one true one, government should embrace it and base all of its laws on this narrow faith expression. Now, there are other forms of religious nationalism in our world, of course. You are likely familiar with fundamentalist Islam in places like Afghanistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other countries where women's rights are ignored and LGBTQ plus people cannot openly exist and be visible, and the rights of other religions are not protected. You might have read about the rise of Hindu nationalism in India. But in the United States, which has a cultural expression that is largely Christian, it is versions of that faith that have wedded to this nationalist movement to forge white Christian nationalism. Now, to really understand this movement, I did a deep dive. I spent many years actually attending meetings of white Christian nationalist groups. Sure, I read their websites, I read their books and their other materials, I listened to their speakers. But to really get inside, I wanted to see it for myself. So I would go to these conferences, and from there, I could understand better how they wanted to change our nation. In the 1990s, I often attended meetings of a group called the Christian Coalition, a far-right organization founded by the late TV preacher, Pat Robertson. When that organization went into decline in the early 2000s, a similar outfit, the Family Research Council, began holding conferences in Washington, D.C. And I attended these for 10 years running. Now, I mentioned being a communicator. So my job was to write about these experiences, to try to sound an alarm. And I did. It wasn't easy. I heard many disturbing things. People boasted about how they no longer speak to their LGBTQ plus children. Speakers urged attendees to check books out from public libraries and never return them because they don't like the content. And usually that was books that had some type of LGBTQ plus theme. People casually discussed how they spent time harassing women outside of abortion clinics. People applauded the idea that America should be a Christian nation, and again, Christian, as they define it, of course, a Christianity that excludes millions of American Christians. And that meant that the power would be in the hands of wealthy, white Christian men who interpreted the Bible in a way that justified their control. Now, when I came home from these events, I often struggled to process my feelings. And I can see now that I often did a poor job of it. My long-suffering wife had to listen to me vent after spending 2 days around people whose religion seemed to be intertwined with hate. In an attempt to get myself grounded after being at these meetings, I turned to works that had provided me with comfort in past times of difficulty. Among them are the Meditations penned by the famous Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. He reminds us that all of us possess a share of the divine. And I think in the modern era, you do not have to define that term in a religious way. I think often it is defined as our shared humanity. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that even those who anger us still have that measure of shared humanity, and that we must find ways to coexist. As he puts it, we are born to work together, like feet, hands, and eyes. Now, my wife is a Unitarian, and I have lurked on the fringes of that faith since we were married in 1992. We were married in a UU church, and our 2 children attended religious education there. When I read that passage by Marcus Aurelius, I can't help but remember that a core Unitarian principle is that we are to recognize that everyone has inherent worth and dignity. At times, seeing what I saw and hearing what I heard in my travels in the world of white Christian nationalism, I will admit that I struggled with that concept of everyone having inherent worth and dignity. Where was the worthiness? The dignity? I had simply heard too much hate. Now, the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, will say they have an answer to this, but to me, it's a bit of a flawed answer. Oftentimes, their response to life's difficult moments is, steel yourself, get over it, move on. This is an easy thing to say, but difficult to implement. In my case, I'm watching an ascendant white Christian nationalist movement that, with the help of the US Supreme Court, is laying waste to much of what I have worked to maintain just about all of my professional life. We're seeing rampant book banning in the public schools of states like Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and others, often prodded by an extremist Christian nationalist group called Moms for Liberty. And to no one's surprise, the books being banned usually have LGBTQ plus characters or themes, or they deal with topics like human sexuality or race. Moms for Liberty would rather that children not learn about our nation's troubled racial legacy. It makes some youngsters feel bad, they say. Let's be clear. The only liberty these moms seek is the right of children to remain ignorant and fearful of the world around them. It is the liberty to hate those who are different from you. It is the liberty to be insular and to refuse to engage with the larger world and learn from different perspectives. Thus, it is not liberty at all that these moms seek, but an intellectual prison whose bars are crafted from intolerance, suspicion, fear, and hate. In Louisiana, a law has been passed requiring the posting of the Ten Commandments in every public school classroom. Governor Jeff Landry boasted that he could not wait to be sued over this matter. Well, he is being sued. My organization, Americans United, along with the ACLU and the Freedom from Religion Foundation, is challenging this in federal court. And as much as I would like to think this would be a slam dunk case, the courts have changed and it may not be. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it would not have been a problem. Now, we don't know. What's sad about this is that this is happening in Louisiana at a time when there are so many problems crying out for attention in that state. Louisiana has one of the worst public school systems in the country, largely because it has been underfunded and so much taxpayer money is diverted into the coffers of private religious schools there. Some studies indicate that Louisiana faces a host of challenges aside from its public school system. Earlier this year, U.S. News and World Report listed the quality of life in all 50 states. Louisiana was dead last. Rather than deal with these issues or admit their failure to address them, legislators there toss red meat to the base and constantly promote divisive culture war issues. A similar situation exists in Oklahoma. That state's quality of life, according to U.S. News and World Report, is 43. So clearly, they too have room for improvement. Yet what are they spending their time on? Public officials seem to have nothing better to do than promote divisive policies, often anchored in religion. A few months ago, Ryan Walters, the superintendent of public instruction in Oklahoma, issued a directive ordering all public schools to incorporate the Bible into classroom lessons. He is threatening to punish any teacher who resists. Now, I should note that there have been many calls to investigate Walters, led by, surprisingly, Republicans in that state. They say Walters is guilty of, quote, alarming actions and, quote, failures at the helm of the state's education department. Concerns that lawmakers highlighted include budgetary performance, spending priorities, and a lack of transparency. We have found this out ourselves at Americans United when we've made public records requests in Oklahoma to find out what exactly is going on there with this plan to bring the Bible into the schools. They have been ignored. So Walters, it seems, is happy to force biblical ethics on the state's children while ignoring any ethical behavior himself. This is a common problem with Christian nationalists. Now, I want to be clear that, of course, the Bible can be taught objectively in public schools. Its influence on history can be examined, its influence on art, its influence on literature. But we have to do these things even-handedly. If you know anything about world history, you are aware that religion's influence and the influence of Christianity is not always positive. Hundreds of years of warfare, violence, and terror, and torture during the Middle Ages will underscore that. So we could have an honest discussion, but that isn't really what Walters wants. He continues to insist that the Bible is the foundation of the American government. This would no doubt come as a surprise to our founders, who crafted our secular Constitution, a document that does not contain the words Christianity, Christ, or even God. You see, what Walters wants is not history, but the whitewashing of history. Some people undoubtedly did exist in the 17th and 18th centuries who believed that we should have a Bible-based government. They were out there, they had their say, but they lost. Our Constitution does not reflect that point of view. As I said, it is a secular document. Walters and his Christian nationalist allies want to portray the losers in that struggle as the winners and rewrite history in the process. They are to history what the creationists are to science. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, you might like one of the similar videos above, or one of the other science, art, legislative, entertainment, and humanist videos from HFFC's YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button above.